they will build a prison cell for every child who is not able to read after third grade.
Our main speakers today, and also the masterminds behind Fathers Read 365, Akeem Staples and Brent Johnstone. So you guys actually met a couple years ago, I'll say, at Temple University. Go to you. And we say some time ago, but you were playing on Temple University football team. And at that time, you both became fathers. But fast forward to 2017, you founded Fathers Read 365 in response to the need to improve reading skills of young children across Philadelphia, and engage fathers in the career and caregivers in this early literacy effort. And then in 2023, you actually did a huge monumental thing and secured funding to have a book bus that you use to distribute and deliver books around the city of Philadelphia and neighboring areas, right? And then in 2024, you read to thousands of children, and it's crazy with reading this number, but distributed over 285,000 books, which is absolutely insane. But ultimately, you created over 25,000 home libraries. But what I want to do is go to you to introduce yourself and really talk about why this topic and why this nonprofit mission and vision is so important. And we'll go to you to actually dive into the mission and vision statements.
Yes, thank you. And thank everyone tonight for joining us. This is our first family literacy night. It was something that really was brought on by the community. It was something that was brought on by the community between questions around just general questions and also around one particular young lady kept saying, I need something for my families. I need something for my family. If y'all could do something that night on like a Zoom. A young lady had grown together out in West Philly, one of the centers we service. And from there, this became an idea. Like, hey, let's really do it. Like, let's really put our time into figuring out how we could get the general public some very needed information. So again, thank you guys for joining us. Fathers Read 365 was born straight from here, right? Straight out the heart, straight from passion, straight from our Keith and I trying to figure out really, and that's why tonight's so special was it started out, how can we help guys coming home from prison, right? And then having so many conversations, that conversation flipped to why are we always working on the back end? How can we get in front of these young men that we met and were working with that were beautiful young men that were ending up in prison in bad situations? How can we help them from stop entering the system? And that's where Fathers Read really dug in and started working with early literacy daycare centers, and mission and vision really came together.
Yes, yes. I agree. Mr. A here, Keith Staples, co-founder Fathers Read 365. Thank you everyone again for joining us tonight for our very first family literacy night. And as Brent was saying, and Amber as well, this all started from the heart. We're going on 9 years now. And every time Brent and I get on the phone, when we're when we're dreaming and putting these things that we're creating into action, I mean, we talk for hours and hours at a time, like each conversation is new. But ultimately, when we did get together, we wanted to do this thinking about not only our families, but everyone around us in our community and surrounding communities, really looking to provide a safe environment for everyone. And because of the programs we created starting off, we kind of stumbled on Fathers Read 365, and we started to learn more and more about not only engagement of parents in early childhood education, but especially fathers being at the forefront of that and how much of a difference we can make. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us here.
Great. So let's go ahead and dive right into it, right? Let's get through what is the mission statement for Fathers Read 365?
Fathers Read 365 advocates for literacy from birth through a non judgmental, shame free, and inclusive approach to fathers, for fathers and families. Using research based practice, we provide resources that equip fathers and caregivers to read daily with their young children because reading is love. Now, how we do it, you can capture it in some of these pictures, right? We believe in connections. We believe our mission means nothing if we don't truly connect with the people we're trying to serve. So in these pictures, you see the book bus. The book bus Amber talked about, was funded by Vanguard. Prior to the book bus, we gave out 100,000 books in our car. Our mission became even deeper when we got the book bus. We gave out 100,000 in 1 year and another 90,000 after that year. And I believe that was 2023 we first got the book bus. You can see the books that me and Keith author, Mr. Healthy Snacks, I'm Beautiful and I'm Proud. We read those books with every group of children we read with. We also model how you can read that book with fathers. Down here in the corner, you see Mr. B and Mr. A in action reading with the kids. That's where we started. Our mission started with let's go out into these daycares and start reading with the kids. And then we started thinking, let's bring the dads, and we started bringing the dads in. And from there, we grew our mission because we started working with the community and understanding what do you guys need? How could we help you? How can we help you in this early literacy space and this father engagement space? And one of the things they told us was we have fathers, we have great fathers. They drop off, they pick up. We know who they are. We just don't have anything and activities for them outside of Dads with Donuts. And that's where we engage. You'll also see the kids holding some bags. They are the dad bags. We love our dad bags. Every for the past 2 years they've been getting donated. I mean, excuse me, they've been packed by Vanguard's staff with us on the Fathers Read 365 day we've had for 2 Decembers in a row. And there's a lot of literacy resources and books in there for the children and their families. That's our mission, wrapped up with a little story about how we actually um, roll out the mission.
The vision, kind of like I was explaining before, Brent and I talking, the vision is ongoing. And we see the world that we live in where homes and communities, especially those that are under-resourced, that are filled with books, reading resources, and families are able to make daily reading a priority. That is what we stress here at Fathers Read 365, especially around engagement with caregivers, with fathers, picking out that time in the evening when you can cuddle up and read that book with your child, whether they're in the womb, whether they're 5 years old, whether they're 8 years old, who knows? I still have my kids 14 years old, 10 years old reading to me. And also that every human being has the opportunity to become a productive citizen in the world. Speaking for Brent and myself, going into these child care centers that we visit as Mr. A and Mr. B and put these performances on, they're angels at that age. And we just want to make sure that they have everything at their hands in order to be that productive citizens. So we want to make sure that, since 61% of homes in low income families don't have books, our vision is to have at least, to have up to 13 books in those children's hands annually. And that's why you see those numbers, how they've grown the way that they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that number 61%, that's alarming. And that's high when you think something as simple as a resource of these exciting books that you may have grown up on are not accessible to most of these kids is devastating. But this is why we're here to talk about what the problem is that we're going to solve. So let's get into the meat of it. And before we go into these numbers, I just want people to drop in the chat. Oh, we have Chicago in here. That's awesome. And some other cities. Temple is in the house today, which I'm here for.
Okay.
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 Be proud.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but
Team you.
Let's talk about these crazy numbers because they are alarming, and it is why we're talking about this. 85%, 85% of all juveniles who face interface with the juvenile court system are functionally illiterate, right? More than 75% of all prison inmates are functionally illiterate. And what's worse is research on top of that says 50% of all prison inmates are living with dyslexia. So I want people in the chat to just say yes or no if they know someone that is impacted with these statistics. If you personally know someone that is a part of this number. I think it's different when it hits home, and it's different when it's someone that you know and love. Let us know if you know someone. But with dealing with the problem to solve, we want to make sure that we're talking about why this is something we need to talk about today. So I'm actually going to throw it to Mr. A and Mr. B to talk about why this topic, why now, and why is this something that you chose as the first topic of the literacy, family literacy night?
Yes. As I alluded to earlier, when we first started the idea of working together, all right, now we're going to help our community. The first thought, Keith and I have always worked in, not always, but a lot of times we worked in settings where we were working with a lot of juveniles who were in detention centers, who were on court, under court order. And it kind of went there. How can we help these guys coming home from prison reconnect with their family? Because we're big on father engagement. And like I said, it flipped because it had to be like, again, we're making this, we're designing this. We have the freedom to work this program and organization the way we want to. And how can we really be impactful? Like, and that's where it flipped to jumping in front of it because we work with those numbers, right? Those numbers are people. People see 85%, they see 75%. And if you go to a lot of conferences and work in this field a lot, you're almost numb to those numbers. But those numbers equal the young men that we know by first and last name, that we've cried with, that we've laughed with, and we know, like, wow, he shouldn't be here. He should not be here, but he can't, right? But he can't spell his name. He can't spell the street that he lives on. And what hope does he have, right? What hope does he have? And we've seen it manifest in the physical in front of us, right? It's not just these numbers. These are, we can name the kids. So that's why it was so important for us to discuss this, because this is what Father's Read was literally built off of, the thought of how do we help, how do we stop, how do we put a dent in these young men and women, right, who have so much more possibilities, but they're falling so short. And not only falling short, a lot of them are falling into, you know, to the worst of the worst, which is prison to in our thoughts.
And I actually want to throw it to you, Mr. A, because you have experience in working in the juvenile system, and that's also not to rain on too much of your story is why you were interested in starting this organization. So can you talk about some of the things you saw in that system with those teenagers and kids that were, alarming?
Right. It's what Brent was saying. They were good young men who some you didn't like. Why are they here? Why are they here? And in at that time, because I was a young 20 something year old coming out of college, this is one of my first jobs in the real world, and I'm here connecting with these young men and young women who are locked up behind bars. And at that time, I never thought, do these kids know how to read? Because even with say they serve their time, and I'm not just talking about kids in detention centers. I'm talking about even some of my constituents who have gone to jail or prison and told me about their experiences. And I think another number that is not on here that we need to look at is the rate of recidivism. So what I'm getting to is, when you see these kids, when you see these adults, it's like, okay, I've served my time and now they're back into the real world. But if we haven't got to the root of, what could be causing this, and it's not just about reading, it's not just about literacy. It's also about going back into their environments and associating with individuals they may have been doing the same types of things they've been doing before, prior to being locked up. But we know that this problem can be solved with the right tools and the right resources. Um, and that has a lot to do with, our passion around keeping these young men and women from these communities out of the criminal justice system and any other system for that matter.
So we're actually gonna pivot now to the what can we do? So we have the resources and we have the data, which we're gonna share with the group in terms of how we combat this, problem in our community. But before we do that, we want the audience to drop in the chat, like, what are some ways you think we as a community can work together to challenge these statistics, excuse me, in our homes, our schools, our neighborhoods. I see a lot of educators in here, so I really want to lean to you and our parents, our grandparents who have spent time with our kids. What are you doing to make sure the children in your life don't become a part of the statistic? Malkia. So encourage and model active reading in young children. Exactly. So encouraging active reading. You can see Malkia knows. Active reading with young children when possible. They could be going to sleep. They
Can
could.
I can I say something with
Yeah,
that?
go ahead.
And speaking of, because Malkia had one of my best experiences in early literacy working with Malkia and PC Plus program. Um, I used to work with a family down, and I still stay in contact with this family down in Richard Island, in the Richard Island homes. And when I met this kid, they kept talking about how smart he was at this young age. And when I met the young man, I was like, wow, he really is bright. Like he has a lot going on. I kept saying, where did he learn this from? They kept saying his dad. And every time I asked where was he learning, they say his dad. And I'm like, who was the dad? Like, where's this guy at? So when I met him, I thought I was meeting Lil Wayne. He looked, that's his profile. I'm like, okay, this is the dad that's teaching this kid all this. Great meeting, we talking, and he's telling me his dad used to run a daycare back in the day. So this is where he learned a lot of things. But long story short, while working with him, when I would come through all the time, I would bring books with me and things. The young guys that was from the neighborhood in Richard Island that the dad hung with, they started coming into the house. And then they started looking at us working with this kid together, and they were really quiet, right? It was almost, I realized, like, almost, we're in class right now, right? We're teaching these young men how to engage with these children, what it looks like to engage. Because a lot of times we say, engage, read to your kids, read to your kids. Well, we know some parents can't read to their kids, right? And everything that me and the father was doing wasn't necessarily reading as much as it was engaging in literacy activities, which is very important. And some of the only things that young men or women can do who struggle with reading, or older men and women who struggle with reading. So when he says working with them young, and that's very important. And we also try to model that when we're out is how do we do this, right? Because you hear it, but a lot of guys didn't grow up with a nurturing dad reading books to them. So what does this look like? And that's what we try to bring, and that's what we try to share on nights like this, how that looks, right? Actually cuddling in bed, actually being silly, actually just making up a song from the book. So those type of things.
Yeah, and I want to talk about before we go into the action items, right? What have you seen in terms of the actual benefit of engaging that demographic you spoke of in that moment? What is the reaction of the person that knows they are empowered to experience? Like, what is that person's reception of that, experience from your perspective?
That he knows that he can do it, right? That there's a I can do this. I'll never forget the first active reading training Keith and I ever did. This young man was in class trying to win the rights of his kid back. His kid was in the system and he had to go to a parenting class. And this was the first parenting class that he went to. And as we were talking to him about a reading plan with his kid, it came up he loved Batman. And he said, "You mean to tell me I could read Batman to my son?" And he was serious as a heart attack. We were like, yes. And we had some Batman books there. And to see, he literally changed in front of us. It was like, oh, I can do this, right? Like, I can do Batman. I can read to my son. I can tell him, I know Batman. And it went from, what's a reading plan? How do I read to my son? I'm confused about what you guys are saying, though I'm trying. Oh, reading Batman. Something as simple as that, right? Because reading Batman leads to reading other things, or even if they stayed at Batman, right? They're good. But yeah, so that's how we've seen it, transform in front of us, in some way.
Mm. That's awesome. So let's now get to the practicality, right? What does this solution look like when it comes to early detection and prevention? And so I'm going to start with you, Mr. A, in terms of what qualifies Fathers Read 365, Mr. A and Mr. B, to be able to speak and give the data on this information. Because I think it's important for people to know that you're not just, presenting this information based on like assumptions or anything. Can you tell people how you came to calculate this information and data?
Well, putting that time in, putting those readings in, those performances, those interactions, those connections we were making at those readings. And like I said before, you go in and you have all of these babies in front of you. So something that Brent and I can pick up on as we're in these performances, we can tell because we have a lot of call response that we do. We're asking the kids questions. All of the active reading training that we talk about, asking questions, building vocabulary, creating connections. That is on full blast with these kids. So we get a chance to we get a chance to definitely see them, but we get a chance to hear them. We get a chance to call on them. We can hear sometimes, that there may be a delayed response. And we're not experts in diagnosing anything, but we may see delayed responses. We may, if it's language, as we're trying to talk, just things we're picking up on as we've gone through our performances, excuse me. And Brent, living with dyslexia, myself coming from a great community, public school, going to a great school, seeing the resources, the more we talked, the more we saw the statistics, we said, what more can we do? And, it went from providing books to, like I said, just seeing, hearing the kids, to now learning more about assessments, about testing. And then it got to, can we test kids? How early can we test these kids? So that's where, that solution came about as to ways we can find, not diagnose, but find reading differences prior to these kids entering grade school so that we could get them on a plan now with their center, the educators there, and also their family at home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw it to Mr. B in a second, but let's just highlight the three steps that are the solution to the problem we stated in the beginning. And that's first early detection and testing, right? Getting your child assessed to see where they are before it's too late. Then we're going to go into bedtime techniques and community and school resources. So Brent, I want you to talk about the early detection and testing, and why that's important, and when the parents or child caregivers should be doing this exactly.
Right. As in anything, the earlier the better, right? Um, myself, I was diagnosed, and someone told me recently, they said, you're really lucky because most people don't get diagnosed with dyslexia. And it was because I played football and I was at school and, I went through there, the proper insurances that I was diagnosed. But I was 20 years old at the time, right? Falling out of school, picking up some bad habits. I always talk to the last conversation me and my dad had was him saying, "Hey, I finally believe I learned what I lived with my whole life from you talking about dyslexia. Don't ever stop talking about dyslexia." My dad died at 73. He had only heard me talk about dyslexia maybe the last 4 or 5 years of his life, right? So he went his whole life wondering, and that shouldn't be, right? That shouldn't be. Keith and I was on a panel for the that wasn't the right to read. It was the I forget the name of the documentary. It'll come to me. But long story short, it was a man in there who was 60 something years old, and he was just getting the help that he needed. And Keith and I had a conversation, and it was like, yo, how can we get in front of this, right? Why are people like myself, my dad, these other people who never learn, right? Who never learn what they live with? How is this happening when we have ways to find out who's living with these differences and we can help as early as possible? And that was May of 2023. And from there, we just started trying our best to meet with the best in this early literacy space to find out how we can help, how we can get early detection, how we can start testing. What are the best tests? What are the things that we're looking for? And we've been meeting with the top professionals for months now. We're starting to create a pilot program out in West Philly, where we're actually going in and doing some early detection, some early testing. But it's all about trying to find out as early as possible, um, if your child is struggling or may have a reading difference. Well, let me say that, may have a reading difference. And there's numerous screeners, and there's ways that you can look up that, I'm not sure that a lot of your schools will have this information, to be honest with you. But you could use some of the keywords that you see here in the slides, or drop in the chat. People know of different, screeners or testing that may be able to help parents and caregivers of such.
So why is bedtime techniques important to combat this problem that we're looking to solve?
Right. Let's look at the word bedtime. It's something that occurs pretty much every single day around a certain time. And what that is building a routine. So, what routines do you have with your kids? How can you be consistent with them? And when it comes to those bedtime techniques, those bedtime routines, it's really about the connection. That's where you pour into the connection, the engagement piece, and also when you're talking about reading with your kids at that time, allowing them to choose the book that they want to read. Because that bedtime technique could be learning how to read the same book 365 times out of the year, and without blinking twice or without thinking about it twice, but going into the book every single time with the same enjoyment. The kids love that. Like I said, I think Brent would probably be better here to talk about his
And,
bedtime techniques.
and I'll jump in real quick. It's funny because we've been doing it so long. We know each other's stories and
Right.
everything now. Yeah, man, bedtime for me because this was literally when I was struggling. This is what I was thinking about. This is what I was trying to get help, and this is why I believe, we are trying to get this help and believe this is breaks this pipeline, is because there's a certain type of love we talk about this transfer when you're reading with your kid, that when you're engaging in these literacy activities with your kid. And I used to experience, because at the time I was working two jobs, and when I would get home, my daughter was just born early, like her first year or two, and it'd be like 7, 8 o'clock at night, so she'd be getting ready to go to sleep. And I used to say, this is my favorite time of the day, baby. This is my favorite part of the day. And We do our everybody hands go up and they stay there. And I wash her. And then after the bath time, we'd go read our book. And Pecan Baby, like I keep saying, she always picked Pecan Baby. And we did other books, but she loved Pecan Baby. And I didn't like Pecan Baby. But anyway, we will read this book, and it was the first time in my life that I had, like, I was a dad, right? And then I was having this intimate time with my children, and I mean my child, and reading with them, and knowing what I overcame to be able to do this for them, knowing that I was just working hard to be able to do this with them, and knowing this is a safe space, this is a loving space, and that she may not remember this book, but this bond, this love, she will always remember. And another good thing is when we're talking to a lot of, because a lot of times we're Fathers Read 365. A lot of our trainings and action and work had we dealt with a lot of moms, right? So one of the things that would come up is my son is not as my husband, or the child's dad isn't as intimate with my kids, especially son man to man. And I would tell him how this reading is a way to grow that. When my son was little and I started reading to him, he curled up in me, like he like cuddled it. And I never did that with my dad. So I was like, at first I was like, what's this? And but at the moment it felt so right. And I cuddled back with him, and we laid down and we read these books. And that was being a dad. That was love. And we also know when if dads can make that time for their kids, that may stop them from going back out the house, right? That may stop them from going to do something, that may put that time in jeopardy, right? Because when you start creating that bond, and now 8:15, little mama looking forward to that reading time, I said I was gonna read with little man at 8:50, that's our time. And now, you become accountable to that time. And now you become accountable to your child. And again, when they're older, they're not going to specifically remember those moments, but they'll never that bond would just be so tight.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's wrap up the early detection. I'm going to share my screen one more time. So, um, last step is community and school resources, spying the programs available in your community for your child. What does that look like in actuality for a parent or an educator?
And that could be some of the hardest parts, right? That can be that's why we're having these nights, right? So we can start identifying the help that parents, schools need, everybody need, right? Because this isn't something that we always hear about. Um, but one of the things we have at our hand is this beautiful is the internet, right? And like I always tell the kids when they're trying to find something, and this not being disrespectful, hopefully this not being disrespectful for anyone, type in what you're looking for and free. That's what I start with. Whatever I'm looking for and free. Because there are a lot of programs out there. There are a lot of resources out there, but we may not know what exactly we're looking for, right? Some of these words, when we say dyslexia, that may be the first time you hear it. You might hear someone say structured reading, right? It may be the first time that you hear it. So you're like, what does that mean? Um, you know what your child needs help with. You know what you need help with. If you can't type it in, speak it into a device, right? Um, and that's also what, again, why we created this night, so we can bring those community resources, so we can bring those school resources that you should be asking for, that you should be questioning your school for. Yes, and it's also why we created our program, which directly addresses all three of these in a unique way.
Yeah, and I'll just go and add Monica's comment on here, which I think is brilliant, is assessment should be a part of the curriculum for development. And, it's a resource that should be included in the program or the learning center the child is at. Absolutely. And thank you, Monica, for throwing in the resources. But it's also important too for the parent to know what that looks like and be able to ask for it as well. And so I think hitting it both ways is absolutely, absolutely pivotal. So go ahead, Mr. B.
I was just going to say, with Monica chiming in, Monica is one of our one of our amazing resources and what we're calling a Ready First Collaborative right now. And that's one thing Keith and I know. We know what we don't know, right? And we know that this is so important. We don't have time to figure out everything, but we know what these kids need. And we know we're starting to learn where the resources are, right? And how to properly partner with them to help us help others. And that's what's real important. We don't know as much, and some of the parents may feel intimidated at times because they may feel as though they don't know as much. Don't let that be what hinders you. Let that be what drives you forward, is that you're trying to equip yourself so you can equip your kid. Your kid advocacy is only going to be as strong as we're able to advocate. So when we talk about things, it's in the taste of, we have to learn. We have to bring these things together. It's why we want people in the chat lending and information. And it's also why you won't see Keith and I being the panelists a lot for these moving forward, is because we want to bring in the people who can give direct answers to direct questions and problems in the early literacy space and the literacy world overall. Not that we can't, but we we know some good folks.
No, that's absolutely right. But I want to also just touch on, why do you say a child should be screened by kindergarten? I think that's a specific time of their life. Why that age range do you need the focus to be there?
They will build a prison cell for every child who is not able to read after third grade. For everyone on here who does not know, children here in our country are taught how to read up to third grade, and then they read to learn from fourth grade on. So when you're saying, with the time, Brent and I, we hear getting it by fourth grade or what have you. We were like, we got to get them as soon as possible. So what we did, we went and created the Ready First Network. Reading empowers all developing youth first. With the intent of caregivers, fathers specifically, being their children's first teachers, and also being on reading level by the time they enter first grade. So hence, early detection and testing, getting them screened prior to kindergarten, because, Brent had mentioned it before, when you want to solve something, you really want to get to the root of it. You want to get ahead of the curve. So that is why we encourage and learning ourselves. Like we said, we don't know everything. That we want to get these kids screened as early as possible.
And the thing also is that we know we can, right? I think God sent one of my last traditional jobs to me in a way of starting Fathers Read, because I was a dean of K-5. And I worked with those teachers from September to really Christmas break, and they were just leave there with at their wits end because they had no information on the kids coming in. Some kids could read, some kids didn't know what a book was. Some kids were trying to open up books upside down. And if you think about it, they're starting school basically, right? Traditional school in kindergarten. As they start school, they should be equipped at least to be kindergarten ready. And as they develop on level by first grade, because that's going to make their ability to learn more a lot easier than trying to catch it and find out, or missing it, and or never being addressed. And then, as Keith says, now no one is teaching it after third grade, right? And now we have this very short window of time in a kid's life for them to learn probably the most important thing that they will learn, right? So if we can address this, and when we address this and give them the proper tools and resources, and make it not just the right of a few kids who can afford it, or a few kids who live in a certain area, when we make it the right of every kid regardless of where they live, to have this ability, to have these curriculums, to have these assessments, that's how we move our country forward. That's how we move our community forward. So to do it, we need to do it as early as possible. We need to do it as they're rolling into what we call traditional school.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'll just add a couple comments that came in here. Monica CC said, the earlier the better. If I can get to a child early, then I have a smaller delay to close. That's powerful there. And delay to close is, you know, how fast they got to catch up, right? Before you
Mhm.
that space you talked about, but by fourth grade, you're no longer learning to read, you're reading to learn. You've already missed the gap if you're still struggling with that. And Julie Washington threw some powerful stats in there with the number of beds needed in prison are decided based on the percentage of children who are not reading in third grade. And there's just a lot of data that correlates. And Mr. B may want to speak on this more before we move into Q&A. There's a lot of data that shows that number is very much it appears in a very similar number later, right?
Right.
It's really
I
crazy.
mean, when we talk about children who struggle with reading early often feel shame, they feel frustrated, they feel failure. And they're going to start to feel that as they enter kindergarten, first grade, right? Because now they're being asked to do things that they're not able to do as well yet, right? And I remember as a kid going into kindergarten and first grade, and I couldn't wait to, I thought I thought school would be fun, right? I thought it would be all right. I got to go in. I didn't realize it was going to be a nightmare, right? And nightmare started in kindergarten, right? So why is it so important to address it by kindergarten? Because they're starting to learn. They're starting to engage in school in kindergarten, and trust me, they're going to start to realize that they're dealing with things that early. I'll never forget first grade, my first grade reading group. I can't remember a lot of things, but I remember my first grade reading group, we were the Blue Jays. And the Blue Jays, the teacher never left us. She always worked with us. She never worked with all the other groups the whole time. She always worked with us. So that early struggles often lead to long-term consequences for our children. And if we're not addressing it early, we're responsible for these consequences that these children end up suffering, because sometimes we're part of those consequences of how they're suffering.
Hmm. All right, so let's close it up here because we're wrapping up, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I want to bring up a point Dr. Julie Washington brought up with, yes, fourth grade is, typically when people stop teaching kids how to read, but it does not have to be the end of the road, right? You need to constantly be teaching kids to read if they're struggling, and, make sure there's still resources for kids in fifth, sixth, seventh grade. And I think that's absolutely true. And so now I want to open it up to any questions or comments from the group, as well as Mr. A and Mr. B with while we put up here our, subscribe QR code for our YouTube channel, shameless plug. We'll be uploading this session to our YouTube page, and also making sure that everyone's, registered for this session, get the next one, which we're planning on doing monthly. So the next topic will be very much different than this, but we want to have a conversation actively engaged to address reading differences. But I'll open it up now to any comments or anyone in the chat that wants to come on and bring a question, as well as Mr. A and Mr. B who want to add more.
Yes, it seems we do have a question in the chat now from, I don't know if this is a question or a statement, but I know we can answer it, Mr. B. From Kimberly Rayleigh. She says, parents who initially cannot read can begin with wordless picture books that offer no right or wrong answers, only vivid imaginations.
Yes, you have those books that are just picture books, and you also, with those books, you can do picture walks. It's something that we work with dads every time we do a reading. When we do active reading training, we speak to picture walks and we show them how to do a picture walk. And basically, it's holding. I don't have a kid book near me right now, but it's just showing the picture on the page, and either you read what's going on that page, or maybe you and your kid go over what's going on in that page together. But they call them, a lot of times people call them picture walks. But yes, that's a great idea, because we know a lot. And here's the thing, just because you struggle with reading, it doesn't mean that you can't help your child become a great reader and be part of the journey, actively engage. And this is one way to do that. And real quick, I wanted to speak to something a young man I work with, just to give you guys more of an example. Because sometimes we say prison, school to prison pipeline, and you know, what does it look like? Like, how does that manifest? Yeah, we see the guy who gets in trouble and all of that, and maybe a shoot 'em up, bang bang. But let's think about this. I was working with this kid, and big guy down in Kensington, real big guy, and the whole thing became he was walking out of class and no one could stop him from walking out of class. He was a good kid that started showing these signs of walking out. I talked to him. He said, Mister, I'll share with you because you share with me. I spoke to them about my struggles of reading. He said, listen, I can't read. And they starting to ask me questions. They starting to ask me to read. I'm not embarrassing myself. I can't read. I'm not staying in that class. That looks like him starting to walk out. That looks like him starting to need to be restrained. That looks like him starting to stop coming to school. That looks like him living in Kensington. What could he fall into, right? The same kid, they say he's the nicest kid that we have here. He's such a joy to work with. But when they started asking him to read out loud, and they should have known, they have test scores on these kids. But that's what it looks like. It starts like this nice young man who could be used as a big protector, a bodyguard, or someone to watch things in the hood. That's what it looks like. That young man walking out of class that he would have stayed in if he could read.
Why, even if someone is not impacted directly by these statistics and by this epidemic, why does making better readers in our community impact everyone across the board?
You have smart, I mean, you have people who have the ability to do more, right? If we talk about just having businesses, if we're talking about growing our economy, if we're talking about growing our community, if more people had the ability to read, they have the ability to learn, right? They have the ability to teach others. They have hope, right? Um, and people don't realize what hope is. I mean, they don't realize how hopeless you feel when you're a struggling reader. And if I could speak to some, I was listening to a podcast prior to this, and it was one of my little criminal podcasts. But they kept saying, why doesn't this guy just get a job? Instead of doing this crime, why doesn't he just get a job? And I said, you know what? Because it's just easy for some people just to get a job. That job starts with an application. That job starts with a search to find out where the job is, what qualifications you need, what you need. These guys by now know they can't read, and they're not trying to use their brain and their reading ability to help them get along. So some people you great at sports, some people are great at singing, some people are great artists, and they figure out how to make it that way. Some people, I got to rob and steal. I didn't figure out my greatness, right? And no one taught me how to read. So guess what? Now, the guy that doesn't pay attention to the number, now his grandmama's getting robbed. Now his sister is getting robbed, something like that. And that's what the way it looks like. And that's what people need. They need hope. They need to know that they can do better for themselves.
Right. And I'm glad you said that because I was going to say I got 6 words for you. You know better, you do better. And I believe that is the power of literacy. And the earlier the better. There was something here I just wanted to share real quick. Monica included teachers have to know how to teach reading using evidence-based methods in all facets of schooling, pre-K through 12, that this is a solvable crisis. It most certainly is.
And Monica, think about that. Monica will be a guest in the future on these. She will be a featured guest in the future. She's an amazing mind in this work. So Dr. Julie Washington, who's chimed in. I also see Shalika Strawberry signed in, has an amazing program, The Audacity to Learn, out here in Philadelphia. Um, and just like that, I forgot my thought. Right. The teachers, right? And speaking to, they need to know how to teach because they need to know how important this is, right? Imagine, because they get to know these kids, they get to love them, they get some of them, right? They get to, but imagine You worked in front of 500 boys to know 300 and something of them ended up in prison because they couldn't read, or 500 of them never graded proficient when you were teaching them, right? They need to understand that and not get hung on what they're teaching, but figuring out what's the best methods, right? What is the best method? Because if the curriculum you were using in that school was the best curriculum, we wouldn't have what 33% proficiency across the nation, right? So yes, teachers need to, and that's why we're going to have some of the people you see chiming in on here, because this is such a bigger conversation. This is just one small conversation, and the bigger conversation is needed, and that we will start to have and address because we have some bright minds. We know what to do, how to do. Keith and I, we see it as our business to connect it, start bringing it together, and be that conduit that our community needs.
So, as we wrap up here, I want to give some shameless plugs on some of the other topics that we're going to be visiting with some of
Hey,
the
Dana.
experts you see in this chat and also from your community. What are some things people can look forward to in future sessions?
Yes, more specific topics that can really help parents when we talk about IEP, discussions around why IEPs are important, what to ask, what to know when you're in an IEP session. When we talk about the science of reading, right? What is the science of reading? What does that look like? What are curriculums that are based in that? When we talk about language development, assessments, things of such like that, like Monica was mentioning. When we talk about parent advocacy, how do we advocate for our children? So those will be some of the topics. Also, what should some of our topics be? Please jump in the chat, right? I always wanted to say,
Sure,
jump
bro.
in the chat.
Well, I just typed it in. I said, what are some topics you all would like discussed as well?
And I see Dr. Washington jumping in. We definitely have to talk about language development. She's probably, if not the best, one of the best top people to speak about that. And that's why we're putting this night together and looking to grow this as we continue to have it, because we have some good information, guys. We have a lot of educated people who want to help. Some look like us, some don't, right? But they all are a coalition of the willing who are willing to help, and we're bringing them together, and we're going to figure this out because I know if it wasn't for my parents just trying and setting a bar for me, that I could easily be one of those guys that went to jail. Because I gave up hope about learning and education and trying. I know what that looks like. So we can't allow that to happen to our babies.
Absolutely. It's bigger than us. It's the future of our communities. It's so much deeper than just um one generation or even one child. So thank you so much, Mr. A and Mr. B, for pouring this wisdom, and also our amazing attendees and enthusiasts in the childhood literacy space for attending and giving your great feedback. I'll let everybody go. Thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. I hope everyone has a great night. And again, Fathers Read 365, our family literacy night. And we hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.
Love
Bye.
you guys. Good night, everybody.